Okay, so now we are on the bottom of Kuf Yudal Amud Aleph 114a. We're at the Mishnah. So the Gemara is now taking us back to Dalit Amud Aleph 114a at the bottom. 4 lines at the bottom where the second word is the big words Mishnah. So that's where we are. And now the Mishnah is taking us back to the Seder night. The last thing we learned was the first cup of wine, right? Kadesh is what we would call it in our Seder. And we learned machlekes, the dispute between the house of Shammai and Hillel, as to what the order of the brachas is. And it's a universal question, not just a question of the Seder night. It's a question of any time one makes Kiddush, if one first makes the bracha hagafen and then makes the bracha of Kiddush sanctifying the day, or the reverse. And we discussed that at a little bit of length and got into the details of why and how we concluded that the halacha follows Hillel with Tosfos' commentary. Of course, there's much more to it. This discussion. Rabbi Gimel pointed me to a Minchas Chinuch, and I have to go look it up. Before I respond, I want to look it up from the inside.
What's it called? Sorry.
The Minchas Chinuch. A comment. The Chinuch is a book that lists all 613 mitzvahs written in Spain in the 13th century, or 12th century, somewhere around there. And the Minchas Chinuch is a commentary on that list of mitzvahs. So over there, he discusses this question of why the Baska, why the heavenly voice is taken into consideration when deciding to follow Hillel. I've heard of that Minchas before, but before I comment, I want to look it up. At any rate, okay, so we're going to go back now to the order of the Seder night. After Kadesh, so we made Kiddush, we followed Hillel, which means we made the bracha Hagafen first, and now we're ready to get to the rest of the Seder. So the next item on the Seder in our list is orchatz and then karpas. Right? We wash our hands and then we eat the vegetable dipped in water. The truth is that when we think about it halachically, not just in terms of the way the Haggadah tells us to do it, the next step after Kiddush is actually karpas, is to dip it's just to eat a vegetable dipped in a liquid. Mm-hmm. Now, it just so happens that halacha is you may not eat a vegetable dipped into liquid before you wash. So we have orchatz before, right? So when you're describing the Seder night halachically, it's first you have to make Kiddush, and then you have to have a vegetable dipped in liquid. Now, 1 second, you're gonna have a vegetable dipped in liquid. So now, make sure you wash before, right? And this is
it's kind of like tzitzit.
Sorry.
Like tzitzit. You don't have to wear tzitzit, but if you have a four-cornered garment, you have to.
Something like that, yeah. That's right. Good morning, Alan.
Like it forces the
exactly
the circumstances.
Exactly. Exactly. And it's important we keep that in mind as we go through learning about this night, because we think about it, good morning, Alan. We think about it in terms of like what the Haggadah tells us to do, mm-hmm. Right? And not necessarily thinking about how it got there. But we're learning the Gemara, we have to think about how we got there, not how the Seder tells us to do. And this is the background that led to that list, right? So we might see in that sense certain things the Gemara is going to describe out of order from the way we experience it, because the Gemara is getting to what brought us there, right? So this is an example. It's not going to discuss orchatz now. It's going to discuss karpas, which is the next thing you have to do. After you make Kiddush, you have to have a vegetable dipped in liquid. Now, when you have, like you said, the circumstances are that if you're having a vegetable dipped in liquid, you have to have a wash before. But that's not relevant to the night of Seder per se. It just is baked in considering the halach.
Right.
Okay. So that's what we are now. The other thing to think about is the Mishnah hasn't told us yet to set our table, meaning to set our kaira. Right? All it told us was to we did talk about preparation for the Seder night. We talked about making sure you have an appetite. We talked about making sure that even if, God forbid, one is collecting handouts, one should make sure they have 4 cups of wine. We talked about making sure your table is set beautifully for freedom, where you can lean, right? But the table is clear as far as we know. We haven't been told to put matzah on our table or to put anything else, right? So that's where we are right now, thinking that. So 5th to last line on the bottom of the page, the big words, Masnisa in our Mishnah. Hiviu lefanov, they now bring before him, right? This is the same language we had with Kiddush, as opposed to he fills up his own cup. The way the Mishnah describes it is his cup is filled up for him. Right? It's all being done for him, the leader, or the people attending the Seder. So they bring before him the requisites for metabel bechazeres, to dip his chazeres, for his chazeres to be dipped in a liquid, either in salt water or vinegar. Right? That's what the halacha says. The Rebbe Zagot, that's also there. Even though it's funny, the Chabad custom is not to have vinegar on Pesach, but nonetheless, in the Rebbe Zagot, it says there that you can dip it into vinegar or salt water.
The Gemara doesn't discuss the actual.
We'll get there, yeah. Okay, so they bring before him that which he needs in order to dip his chazeres being his maror item, right? Maror is a general term for bitter herbs, and which we'll get there. The Gemara discusses different vegetables that qualify as maror, and one of those vegetables are chazeres, which we have is romaine lettuce. Okay, so he has to dip his chazeres. I hope you're asking a question now. Did you ever dip a lettuce for karpas?
No.
So why is the Mishnah saying chazeres? We'll get there. Okay. So matabel chazeres, you have to bring before him those things so that he can dip his chazeres, you can have his chazeres dipped in something, vinegar or salt water, lettuce. And this will be all he eats. This will be all he eats till he gets to the dessert after his bread. What's the dessert after bread? That would be, on the Seder night, what do we eat right after matzah? Our bread on the Seder night is matzah, not bread, right? But it's matzah bread. And right after matzah bread, we eat maror. So the Mishnah is telling you, until you get to that maror, which here we're calling the dessert after your bread, meaning your maror, this is all you're eating, all the vegetable you're eating. Okay? So this is number 2 on the Seder. He made Kiddush. We learned that yesterday, the day before. Now he has to dip a vegetable, as we're learning it now, chazeres, the lettuce, into something. And that will be all he's going to eat in terms of vegetables until he eats the maror, which is right after he eats matzah. Mm-hmm. So it's important to keep this in mind, as we'll see in a minute from the Gemara. Okay, now, heviu lefanav matzah v'chazeres v'chareises. Now they bring him his kaira, they bring him his Seder plate. His matzah arrives. We set it up before Kiddush, right? But here the Mishnah is telling us that at this point it's set up, or at least by this point it's set up. When we get to the Alter Shulchan Aruch, we'll discuss that in more detail. But they bring him his matzah, more chazeres, again, that maror qualified vegetable, which he'll use later, v'charoises, and they bring him the charoises, which is that dip that looks like the apple Hawaiian nut mixture, which we'll learn about soon, which is to remember the mortar that they used in Egypt. They're bringing it to him now. The shnei tashilin and 2 cooked items, which for us would be our ziraya and our egg. Those are 2 cooked items. Okay. Now, it's interesting to note, this is important, that here he brings the charoises, that dip is arriving now, which informs us that the dipping you just did a minute ago, the Mishnah just told you to dip your vegetable into something, is not in the charoises, because the charoises only arrives on your table after you've already had that vegetable. Right? Okay. So now his Seder is set. His kaira is set. Matzah, chazeres, which would be the maror that he's going to be eating later. Charoises, that dip, which he'll be using later. 2 cooked items, the zoroya and the beitza, the egg and the shank bone, which we have. Now his Seder plate is ready, because the matzah now has arrived. Right? Because as we're going to learn, when he recites the Haggadah, it's necessary to have these items. It's not necessary to have these. That's what it would seem. You don't have to have these items at Kiddush necessarily, but you have to have them there for the Haggadah recitation.
Well, this would take care of the issue of covering the matzah.
Okay, when we get to Talmud Pesachim, we'll get to that. Yes, but you are correct. That's pretty much what I was going at. Okay, now the Mishnah concludes, even though the charoises is not a mitzvah, it's a custom. It's a Jewish custom, and we are obligated to uphold Jewish customs, but it isn't a mitzvah per se, it's a custom. Rabbi Levi ben Tzadok Omer, Rabbi Levi ben Tzadok says, Mitzvah, it is a mitzvah. It actually is a mitzvah to have charosos. When we get to the Shulchan Aruch, we'll see more.
Yeah, I mean, it plays out in the Seder. You have to make the korach, the sandwich.
Okay, but is that a mitzvah? Where the Torah does it say to have this?
Okay.
Right?
No, completely.
Doesn't. In other words, mitzvah is not the only terminology for obligation. You can have obligations that aren't mitzvahs.
Yeah, no.
Right? But here we're saying it's a mitzvah in this view. Okay, we'll get to that. The Gemara will tell us more details. Yeah? The Gemara is going to explain.
In other words, the items in the Seder.
Not always. Some of them are customs. Some of them are rabbinic commandments. Some, like for example, washing before you have the karpas is not a mitzvah. It's an obligation, as per the sages, which instructed that when you eat a wet vegetable, you have to wash. Right? My friend and I once made a list of how many mitzvahs you do at the Seder night, how many are biblical, how many are rabbinic, and how many are custom. I don't think it was fully exhaustive, but it was quite extensive. Yeah, I have it somewhere in my notes. Anyway, okay, but Mikdash, now in the time of the base of Mikdash, they would have had the actual piece of meat from the offering of the Pesach on their Seder plate. Right?
Oh, yeah.
That's what they would have had now, because you also have to have that present as you recite the Haggadah, and not just eat at the end. Okay, so this is what we learned from the Mishnah. Karpas, he has to dip. As the Gemara says it here, the chazeres, he should dip his chazeres, which is his bitter herb, the lettuce bitter herb. That should be dipped. That's all he's eating now until he eats the next vegetable, which is going to be maror, that he eats after his Pesach, after his matzah. And then after he's dipped, at that point, he has to have the Seder table set with his 2 cooked items, egg, zraya, which we have today. You have to have your chazeres there, your next maror. You have to have your charoises, your dip. And the dip is either a mitzvah or not a mitzvah. And if it's in the times of, and you have to have your matzah. And if it's times of the Bais Mikdash, you would have had the actual Pesach offer. Okay, now let's get to the Gemara on top of page Kufi Dal Beis 114b. So now let's think about this. What did the Mishnah tell us? The Mishnah told us that you're eating the same vegetable twice, right? Because the Mishnah said you're dipping chazeres at this point. So as far as we know from the language of the Mishnah, at karpas, we're dipping lettuce. We're dipping a maror item to be eaten, right? Which means, and then it says, you're not going to eat it again until after matzah.
It says again.
It says this won't be eaten until you have the dessert after your matzah, until you have the next vegetable then, right? Till then, which means, as far as we know from the Mishnah right now, you're eating the same vegetable twice. Once, when you dip it right after Pesach, after the Kiddush, and then a second time after you have matzah. That's what we know right now. And it's the same vegetable so far as we know. Yes? We'll get to that, but so far as we know. Which bracha are you making when you eat the first time? All you're making is hadama. Why should you be making anything else? Since the Gemara Mishnah already told us that you're going to be eating that maror after your matzah, and that's when you're going to be fulfilling the mitzvah of maror, because maror is to be eaten with matzah.
Do the bracha for maror.
Which means the bracha for maror is not being made at the first time you eat the lettuce.
That implies it must be different.
That implies it must be different. That implies that when you eat the maror the first time, as the Mishnah told us, you are not fulfilling your obligation to eat maror, which is why you have to make another bracha on the eating of maror after you eat the matzah. Oh, but it seems like it's the same vegetable.
Seems like, but because of this.
But right now we know it's the same vegetable. So let's see now the Gemara. This is exactly where the Gemara is going. Let's see. Reish Lakish says, this teaches us that mitzvah is tzriches kavana. This is a massive sugya, massive subject throughout all of the Gemara. When you perform a mitzvah, do you have to be consciously aware that you're performing a mitzvah? So if I am walking down the street and I hear someone sound the shofar, I'm like, oh, that's nice. But I'm not consciously aware intentionally that I'm listening to this maror because I'm listening to the sound of the shofar because I want to fulfill the mitzvah of shofar. Did I fulfill my obligation or not? Someone put tefillin on me. I didn't think about the fact that this is a mitzvah. Did I fulfill the mitzvah for tefillin or not? In this case, it's Seder night and I eat lettuce because I like lettuce. Not because it's any mitzvah. I'm not aware of it. Did I fulfill my obligation or not? Now, what's the difference? Well, if later I found out, hey, it's Seder night, I have to be eating maror. If I already fulfilled my obligation by eating the maror because I enjoyed it, then if I eat it a second time, I cannot make a bracha, thank you Hashem for the mitzvah of maror, because I've already done it. If, however, mitzvah requires intentionality, which means when I ate the maror the first time because I enjoyed it, I did not fulfill my obligation. So when I realize it's Seder night and I have to eat maror and I eat it a second time, I have to make a bracha, thank you Hashem for the mitzvah of maror. What are we doing here, according to the Mishnah? We're eating maror one time, not for the mitzvah of maror.
Make a declaration that you're not making it.
In theory, I could make a declaration, hey, I'm eating the maror now, not the intention of fulfilling my obligation. But the Mishnah doesn't make such a requirement. All the Mishnah says is, eat maror twice. And this time, it's not for maror. The second time, when you eat it after the matzah, that's going to be for maror. Implying that when I ate it the first time, because I didn't intend to fulfill my obligation, I didn't fulfill my obligation. I did not, which is why I'm being required to eat it again after the matzah. And therefore, Rish Lakish concludes, this teaches us mitzvahs siches kavana. That mitzvahs require your intention to fulfill. Otherwise, you didn't fulfill. As he explains, because at this moment, when I eat the maror, the chazeres that the bishop told me to dip, I eat it after Kiddush. It's not at the time of the obligation, the achal that I'm now eating. The achal that I'm eating this maror now, not at the time of obligation. I'm eating it after Kiddush. The boide priyadama, and the only bracha I'm making is thanking Hashem for fruit, for vegetables. Who the achale? That's the way in which I'm eating. Vil dilman, therefore, perhaps la yikavan maror. I did not have intention to eat maror because not at the time of maror. I only ate the lettuce just because the Mishnah told me to. Therefore, I therefore have to again eat it and dip it. And the Charai says, with the intention of eating it for maror. The Isa Kodaito, because if you're going to suggest mitzvahs loy boy kavana, that I do not need to be intentional about fulfilling the obligation in order to fulfill it, why do I have to do it again a second time? I've already done it before without intention. But if I fulfill my obligation without intention, then I did it the first time right after Kiddush. Why do I have to do it again after maror, after matzah? So from the fact that the Mishnah says, hey, you dip chazeres once after Kiddush, but you only made hadama, it's not maror time, so you didn't think you were doing the maror, and therefore you did not do maror, and therefore you have to do it again later. But if mitzvahs didn't require intentionality, then by the very fact that you had maror after Kiddush, that would be enough to fulfill your maror, even if you didn't think about the fact that it's a mitzvah, and therefore when you came to it later after matzah, you would not be able to make a bracha alachas matzah, because you already filled your mitzvah. Therefore, Rish Lakish concludes, we must therefore say that mitzvahs don't require your intentionality for it to be fulfilled. And if you happen to have heard, this means that you have to have intentionality. And therefore, if you happen to have heard the shofar and you don't have intention, doesn't count. Okay, so as far as the halacha goes, it's one of those subjects that every good Rosh Hashiva speaks about at length, because, for example, when it comes to matzah, we're going to learn, the Gemara tells us that if someone tied you down, stuffed matzah down your throat, and you had no intention of eating the matzah for the sake of the mitzvah, you did fulfill your obligation. Why? Because at the end of the day, you enjoyed the matzah. And somehow that counts as intent. But when it comes to shofar, no. So the Gemara isn't exactly clear cut about what level of intentionality is required. And every Rosh Hashiva has a discussion on exactly what the halachic definition of is intentionality and when it works and when it doesn't work. So we're not going to go down that whole rabbit hole. We're just going to focus on the Gemara's discussion here. So don't derive from here to halachas anywhere else, because each case is different to what level of intentionality is required. Okay, so all we have so far is that Rish Lakish posits that mitzvah requires your intention, and he derives it from the fact that the Mishnah tells you to eat maror a second time after you have matzah, even though you already ate maror dip the first time right after Kiddush.
Doesn't give us any conclusiveness as to whether you can use the same maror lettuce twice.
Well, so far we think yes, because the Mishnah told us to have chazeres dipped. We'll get to that in a second. But so far we know that the Mishnah said, in other words, we cannot take what we know from our Seder that we have parsley or potato or onion, right? The Mishnah told us to take chazeres. It told us to take that maror qualified vegetable. So which means at this point, so far as we know, we're having it twice. Once with hadama because the Mishnah said to dip it. We don't know why yet. And the second time because we have to eat it at the maror time with our matzah. Okay. So says the Gemara at this point, Rish Lakish is of the opinion that this teaches us that you have to have intentionality when you're fulfilling the mitzvah, which is why the Mishnah told us to have that maror a second time. Because the first time when we did it after Kiddush, it wasn't matzah time, it wasn't maror time, and therefore we can assume we had no intentionality to fulfill the mitzvah maror, and therefore you have to do it again. To which the Gemara says, Mimai, why are you concluding this so quickly? Dilma, perhaps, La'olam, in reality, mitzvahs ain't tzrichas kavana. Mitzvahs do not require intentionality, which is the halacha, by the way. Generally speaking, you don't have to be intentional about the fact that you're fulfilling a mitzvah. But again, I said we're not going down that rabbit hole because there's qualifications to that.
Well, it's a question among the sages.
Yeah, but the Gemara seems to be conclusive about it, but yet in different places applies the standard differently. And therefore, there's all kinds of discussions in the post-Talmudic literature, but still this very day, about how exactly you qualify those qualifiers and how you create a precise definition that works universally.
Carving out like exceptions.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
But Levi,
Yes.
when the mitzvah to hear the shofar,
yeah,
the mitzvah is to hear the shofar.
Right.
So if somebody's blowing it and you have no intention of listening to it, you're still hearing it.
Right. That's the question. This is a universal question. Do I have to be aware of the fact that I'm doing a mitzvah now? Or is it enough that it happens to me?
Well, you should be aware.
Okay. That's not for sure. But the question is, did I fulfill the obligation of the mitzvah anyway? Or did I not? That's the question. And the difference would be, if I realize I decided to do it later properly, am I allowed to make a bracha? If I already fulfilled my obligation, I cannot do the bracha. If I didn't fulfill my obligation, I have to make a bracha. Right? Okay. But you're right. Okay, so now the Gemara says, why are you concluding that you have to have intentionality from our Mishnah? Dilma, perhaps, la'olam, the truth is, mitzvahs ain't tzrichas kavana. Mitzvahs do not require intentionality. And if it happens, it happens. You fulfilled your obligation anyway. As for your argument, if so, why do I have to dip a second time? I already had maror the first time. I had the chazeres the first time after Kiddush. Why do I have to do it again if mitzvahs don't require intentionality, which would therefore mean by the very fact that I had the lettuce dipped in salt water the first time, I already fulfilled my obligation for maror.
Or you could have just said the bracha more at that moment and covered.
But even if I didn't, I already fulfilled my obligation.
Yeah, but you lost.
Which means I lost the bracha, but I already did it.
Which should be unnecessarily. So therefore,
exactly.
There must be.
Okay, so let's see. Why am I doing it twice? In order to cause the children to notice that something's different. That's why I'm doing it twice. Right? Because it's uncommon that we have like appetizer, which is like what this vegetable is dipped in something, right at the beginning, without first washing, having our challah or bread, in this case matzah, and then having our dips.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So in order to arouse suspicion from the children. Now, says the Gemara.
So that's more proof. Sorry.
So that means
that's more proof that you didn't have intent to make.
Oh, which means you didn't have intent to have the maror effect here.
Yeah.
Which therefore begs the question: if so, in Cain, let's therefore respond by saying in Cain, if so, lashminon shayirakas. Then why not tell us to have any vegetable? Why did the Mishnah say chazeres? In Reish Lakish's view, it's very clear why the Mishnah says chazeres. The reason why the Mishnah says chazeres in Reish Lakish's view is to teach you that even though you ate chazeres after your Kiddush, it doesn't count for the mitzvah of maror. You got to eat it again. For Reish Lakish, it's clear why the Mishnah says chazeres. But if the reason why we're dipping twice is just to arouse suspicion, why say chazeres? It confuses me because now I ate chazeres and I don't have intention, and yet I fulfill my obligation anyway. Now I'm stuck. Do I have to eat the maror again another time? To which the Gemara says, you're right. It is really any vegetable. And Iyashmin and Shayirakos, if the Mishnah would say straight out, eat any vegetable, Haba Mina, I might have wrongly concluded that I only do this dipping when I actually have another vegetable. That's what I do twice. Dipping. If all that's available to me is chazeres, I might have mistakenly concluded I shouldn't dip twice. That's the mistake I could have made. If the Mishnah said dip any vegetable into salt water or vinegar in order to arouse suspicion from the children, then I would say, one second,
I don't have it.
I don't have the other ones. All I have is
And
lettuce.
you wouldn't use it because you
Then I
have to
wouldn't
do it
use the lettuce because I would think that I'm not that I might be accidentally doing my mitzvah now, and I don't want to do the lettuce now and save it for after the matzah. To which the Mishnah says, even if you have chazeres dipped twice,
If you don't have intentionality, you can
even
fall back
though
on it.
ordinarily
You can fall back on it.
without intentionality you fulfill your mitzvah anyway. In this instance, I guess you'll have to have a negative intentionality in saying, I don't want to fulfill my obligation now. So it's even. So when the Mishnah says to put chazeres in Reish Lakish's view to teach you that the fact that you ate chazeres doesn't mean you did the mitzvah. You have to have in mind to have the mitzvah. In the counter opinion's view, which is the halacha, the reason why the Mishnah says chazeres is to tell you even if all you have chazeres, still dip twice to confuse the children. Not to make you think that I should avoid dipping twice because I only have lettuce. Mashmalon comes the Mishnah and teaches you that even if you only have chazeres, but you need to dip twice. So that we arouse the suspicion of the children. Okay, we'll stop here. We'll go to the bris downstairs and get along tomorrow. We'll see the Mishnah is going to introduce other texts that are relevant to the discussion of whether or not you have to have intentionality when you're fulfilling mitzvahs. And then we'll get into the other things that the Mishnah said about setting your table, having your matzah, having your two cooked items, and so on. And then from there, we'll get to the Alter B'Shulchan Aruch when we're ready.
Wow.
Have a good day, evening.